Hello travelers, Boardman21 here, and today we're going to discuss the top 8 corruption pushing builds for endgame in the empowered content. With this, I'm going to go over some of the details of all 8 builds, show you gameplay of them, and then in the description we will have links to all of them so you can get started with whichever one you find the most pleasing or looks to be the type that you would want to play the most. Now, these are going to go in order how I have rated them. You might rate them in a different order. All of them are super viable in endgame, so really it doesn't matter which one's first and which one's 8th. They're all going to go extremely well. They're basically going to all be playable and push as far as you're willing to push them and not get bored. Alright, let's go ahead and get started with number 8. Coming in at number 8, we have the Necromancer with the auto-procking zombies on minion death build. Now with this build, you're going to be running 100 plus minions. You're going to be using drain life to get massive amounts of mana, spamming a bunch of wraiths, and then every time a wraith dies, it'll have a chance to proc a zombie. A zombie will then run around, explode, dealing massive damage and giving you a huge amount of ward. This build easily pushed over 300 waves on the very first go with it and can go much further. It didn't even have min-max gear. And in endgame, while this one will be a bit slower to push through the echoes, it can go really high into the corruption due to the insane amounts of damage output and ward that you can get for shield, so that it's almost impossible to die, especially in a play at your own pace endgame. Fair warning, this one can kill your FPS a little, although I didn't seem to suffer much until I went over 150 minions. Coming in at number 7, we have the Bleeding Warpath tank on the Paladin. Now this build is tanky and you're always moving. You'll be channeling Warpath with 100% uptime, doing real good damage. You will be based around doing dot damage as well, lots of bleeds, so you'll do some decent hit damage. But it's stacking the bleeds that really takes down the bosses. On top of that, due to the relic, you will also be leeching some of that physical damage over time that you're doing, which is going to keep your health full at all times, and you'll have a lot of damage reduction, especially with the Wings of Argentus on and that 40% damage reduction that it gets. This is also a speed running tank. You're going to be in Warpath and you'll have all of the increased move speed with it, so you'll be flying through the echoes, and this is one of the better builds for speed clearing through the corruption island so that you can stack it as quickly as possible. Coming in at number 6, we have Lizard IRL's Turbo Vengeance Void Knight, and this thing packs a punch. Not only can it put out the DPS, but it is a tanky boy. Now while it does try and kill things before it gets killed, this thing has been proven to push really high up in the arena, and in the corruption he's currently, I believe, right around 600 plus corruption, and he's been streaming that for a couple weeks. So if you're looking for a build that can push it high into the end game, this is the one for you. This build is mostly based around just doing damage with vengeance and taking advantage of the damage reduction while using a two-handed weapon to put out a lot of damage. You will also be using volatile reversal to make sure that your movements can keep you out of harm's way. Coming in at number 5, we have the Shield Throw Paladin, and this thing is a ZDPS tank. Now while there are some versions of it that can get quite a bit more damage out of it, especially if you dig into going full spell, the basis is all the same for being tanky. You're stacking a lot of armor. With this you can get 20, 30, I've even seen 40,000 armor in some builds to where you're getting that 80 to 85% damage reduction, and with the boost in 8.2 where you now get 70% of that effectiveness towards all the other ailments, you become very tanky, especially when running this with sword and shield. Once you put a shield on and you stack all that block chance that you can get as a paladin, you're going to be blocking up to 100% of all hits and taking even more reduced damage. And if you cap that with the amount of leech or health regeneration that you can get, especially when matched up with sigils, you just almost become unkillable. Now this build can push really high up into corruption, however, it is a bit of a slower killer, especially against single targets, so it'll take some time to get there. Coming in at the number 3 and 4 spot, we have two builds that are very similar and yet played completely different on the way that you stack damage. And that's going to be the Shadow Dagger, Shadow Cascade build, and the Shadow Cascade full melee build that's not built around the Shadow Dagger. Now, Last patch it was the Shadow Dagger build that was the #1 build and would have made the #1 on this list. However, with the nerf to Shadow Dagger effect and how you can't get the plunge crit that does massive damage until you do at least 4 hits instead of just 1, it's definitely brought it down on the list quite a bit. But there are 2 ways to play this build, and there will be 2 builds that are linked. One will be a strict 100% crit all melee version of it, and the other will be a really reduced cooldown of shift and proccing to get a lot of shadow daggers, which will be Amarithi's version, which has been pushed way up in the ladder. Both of these builds not only clear echoes extremely quickly, but they can push high into corruption with as few deaths as possible. You could even play hardcore if you wanted. Coming in at number 2, we have Foe's Nova Boy, and this thing is pure lightning damage. It focuses on 2 skills, one being that you'll have Elemental Nova, which will be targetable so that you can take out AoE anywhere on the screen, and the second will be for single target. You'll have Lightning Blast, which absolutely just destroys single target rares and bosses. And this thing can fly through echoes. You have Teleport, which can do damage while you're moving for excellent clear. And then on top of it, you'll also be very, very tanky, especially with the damage reductions you get with both Flame Ward and Lightning Aegis. This build has pushed many times above 500 waves in the arena, and it can definitely push just as high in the corruption. And coming in at number 1, we have the low life or the full life Earthquake Werebear. Now, it should come as no surprise that this build has made the top of the list, as it is just absolutely destroying content with its broken interaction that allows you to swap on Boulder's Wrath, which you can easily acquire on the Spirits of Fire timeline, go into Werebear form, and then proc Earthquake every time that you charge, which you can do as little as 1.5 seconds. This doesn't cost mana, doesn't have cooldown, and allows you to spec Earthquake to do the most damage. It is an absolute brutal build that can destroy everything in a large AoE while you take little to no damage because of 1, how tanky you are, and 2, how quick you are just flying through the maps. If you haven't given this build a try, I definitely recommend trying to put it together. It will most likely see changes sooner rather than later, but of course we said that before patch 8.2 and somehow it is still here. That's going to wrap it up for the top 8 builds today that you can play in Last Epoch right now. What do you guys think? Do you agree with this list? Is there a build that you think should have made the list? Let me know in the comments below and we can discuss it. Alright travelers, have a good day, and as always, stay safe.